Hi everyone and welcome. Today I'm going to show you all the books that I managed to finish in April. Now, April was a good reading month. I finished a total of 8 books, which is definitely a lot for me, and especially in a minute when I show you the books, you will see that some of them are absolute tomes. Now, all of them were adult fantasy, and somehow I started 4 new series. Now, that's definitely more than I want to start in a given month, but it's not as bad as it sounds because one is a new release, so I'm immediately on track with that series, and then the other 3 are part of relaunch. So all of them are planned, and of course I will make progress in them in the near future. So it's not as bad as it sounds. Then I also made progress in 3 series that I started previously, and I managed to read 1 standalone as well. Now, as always, I will go over these books chronologically, starting with the ones that I finished first and then going to the most recent reads. And I will try to mention if I listened to it on audiobook or if I read it physically or on ebook. And the first book that I finished was an absolute tome, and that is The Wall of Storms by Ken Liu. So this one I did immersive reading, but the majority of it I listened to on audiobook alone. And this is the second book, of course, in the Dandelion Dynasty. I absolutely adore this book. This might be my favorite of the month, but I'm not sure because I read a lot of amazing books. Ken Liu is an author who has a very unique way of telling a story, and I have heard, I don't know if this is true, that he uses a lot of the traditional Chinese ways of storytelling. So at the very least, I can say that this read very differently from some of the Western authors that I have become used to. So if you're looking for something completely different and very unique, I would highly recommend this one, especially if you like political intrigue and following big set of characters. Here you of course have the very big empire and you just follow the different characters in this empire. But the way that Ken Liu writes characters is just with extreme nuance, with a lot of dimensions to them, and I absolutely adore that. These are the characters or the type of characters that if you would take them out of the book and you put them in our own world, you wouldn't even notice that they are fictional because there are just so many dimensions to them. They're so realistic. Absolutely adore that. Now, even though we do have that, and as a character-driven person, I like to be very close to the characters, that's not the case here. You have third person, you really have a narrator who, almost like a historian, is telling you the history of this empire and the people who live in this empire. So you are more watching it from a distance, but because everything is so interesting, because you have that political intrigue that's definitely top-notch, I don't really mind. And I would say that here the comparison to A Song of Ice and Fire comes along, where yes, you have a very big cast of characters, you're not going to feel extremely connected to all of them, but because the story in itself is so good, you're just along for the ride and you don't even realize that you have read so many pages and it just flies by. So yes, highly recommend this one and I had a great time. Then the other book that I read afterwards, and this is one that I didn't really like that much, and I listened to this one on audiobook as well, that is Prince of Thorns by Mark Lawrence, the first book in the Broken Empire series. So in this one, we follow York, who is a prince, but he decided to leave the kingdom for one way or another, and you will definitely realize that when you, of course, read the story. And he's a very bad boy. Now, I have talked about morally grey characters in the past, and that I like to read about morally grey characters with a lot of nuance. I said that with The Wall of Storms as well. Here, York is probably one of the darkest characters that I've read about. But he's not very nuanced. He's almost one-dimensional, I would say, where he does bad things because bad things are fun. And of course, you do learn a bit about his past and why he is the way he is. But still, I think that he's not nuanced enough for me to really enjoy him as a main character. I think that sometimes I just feel like he's a little bit of an edgelord, and I don't like to read about those types of characters. So I still want to continue in this world. I still want to read more about or more of Mark Lawrence's books, especially because I really enjoy his writing style. But this book in itself didn't really blow me away. So I'm going to read the second one, King of Thorns, in May, see how I like it. I will, of course, finish the series because it's very short. But after that, judging from this first book, I don't really think that this will be a series that I absolutely adore, just because the character work is lacking for me. We have a main character who, like I said, is pretty one-dimensional, but then the secondary characters, they're not that special either. So yeah. The story in itself is extremely fast-paced, which again is something that I like to have a more slower pace, where we pay more attention to details and pay attention to the aftermath of the actions that actually happened. And I felt like that was also not the case here. So this one was probably one of my least favorites of the month. After that, I finished my first physical book, and I finished that one on ebook, and that was Death House Gates by Steven Erikson, the second book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series. Now, I absolutely adored this one. If you've already read it, I actually had a spoiler-filled discussion over on Steve's channel that I will link in the description box down below, but this was amazing. If you don't know, I actually already enjoyed Gardens of the Moon quite a bit, but this one was a step up. We have a different cast of characters for the most part, but I actually like these more. We have Felicin, who I immediately became attached to. I think that she has a very interesting character arc, and I do want to see what happens next. But we also have some characters that don't even have their own POV. We just see them through the eyes of the other POVs that are just extremely interesting to follow. I liked the plot in this one as well. I feel like for the first and the second book, and I don't know if this continues throughout the series, that all of the books actually have their own story almost. It's very contained. And I just liked this one and the setting and almost the religious war and the Exodus a lot in this one. So yeah, I cannot wait to jump into the third one. I will probably try to do that at the end of this month, but this was one that I greatly enjoyed. And well, we will be talking about another one because this is the one that I finished after That House Gates, and that is The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. But between these two, both of these are very big stories and they are very different from one another. But I like the story that Malazan is telling, which is much more realistic in my opinion, much more gritty, very nuanced characters, a lot more than what happens in The Way of Kings. So of course I am hosting the read-along for the Stormlight Archive series, and the first book, The Way of Kings, we were reading in the first 3 months of the year, and we already had a spoiler-filled discussion for this one as well on my channel that I will link in the description box down below. Now this one was a bit of a disappointment. I think that if I would say that it's a little bit middle of the road for me, and a big part of it is the characters. So these characters did not really feel nuanced. They felt like, with The Wall of Storms, I said you could take these characters, put them in our own world, and you wouldn't realize that they were fictional. That's definitely not the case here. I just think that Brandon Sanderson is not the best author when it comes to characters, and maybe that's intentional. A lot of them feel almost like superheroes, where there's just not that much to them. They feel pretty one-dimensional. Sometimes he tries to add something like trauma, and he does an okay job with it, but it's never really excellent. I do think that his plot and all of his twists that he put in it is very enjoyable to read. I also think that his magic systems are something that he's very good at, but this is one of the books where I really felt the length. This is 1,000 pages and I felt it. And usually when I really enjoy a book, I get through it and I realize, wow, I just read 200 pages, and even though my brain is hurting, I had a lot of fun the entire ride. And I felt that way with That House Gates, for instance. While here, after a couple of pages, after a couple of chapters, even though this is a very easy writing style, I had enough of it. I wasn't really very intrigued to keep going. I didn't really feel that Sander launch that a lot of other people feel. I was reading a lot towards the end because I had to get ready for the live show, but I wasn't really reading a lot because I wanted to and because I wanted to know more. So I just think that Brandon Sanderson might not be the author for me. Now I still want to continue because middle of the road is still okay. And I think that the last part was definitely the best part of this entire book. So I hope that the second book starts off that way and that it's not like a very big waiting for the big ending, which is something that the Wheel of Time also does quite a bit. So I do hope that that one just starts off very strong and stays that way. But it's not as good as a lot of people say, the best fantasy ever written. Like, no, please, it's really not. The writing style is pretty mediocre. It's easy to get through, but that's everything that you can say about it. I think that the characters are not that well done. And of course, the big plus here is the plot and is the magic system. But usually that's not something that makes or breaks a story for me, typically. So that's why I just felt a little bit lukewarm about this. And for a book that is 1,000 pages, I do expect more of it. Next up, I read 2 new releases. The first one was A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross, and I really enjoyed this one. Now, this is actually the first in a duology. I didn't know that when I picked it up, but this reads like a standalone. And at the end, you can see where the second book will take us, but the mystery of the first one is definitely solved here. So if you're afraid of that, don't be, just pick it up, because I really enjoyed this one. This feels very folklore-esque, even though it doesn't take place in our own world, but it has that medieval Ireland feeling to it, in my opinion, and it has nature-based magic. Now in this one we have a mystery, because girls of this community are getting missing and they don't really know what happened to them. And we are following different characters in this mystery, trying to unravel who abducted these girls and how can we get them back. In this book we also have 2 romances, and the first one is very young. It's more or less innocent. We have young people who are trying to discover what they want in the world and how other people fit in. And I really enjoyed watching this evolve, but I like the other romance more, which is between two older people and one of their children gets abducted. And then we have the question, where does that leave us? What if we don't get our daughter back? Then we don't really have this family anymore, it's just the two of us. Is there still something between us? Do we need that child to actually keep up the pretense, or is there really still a relationship here? And I really liked seeing that, but I really also liked just the contrast between these two romances. And in the end, how the mystery gets resolved is something that I found was very well done as well, because sometimes that can really break the story if it's not really believable, but I think that this is very well done. And I also think that where the story will take us in the second book of the duology will be very interesting. So yes, I would highly recommend this one, especially if you like those folklore-esque tales. Then the other new release that I read was a standalone, and that was Pandora by Susan Stokes Chapman. Now, this is a Greek myth retelling. I wouldn't really call it a retelling because it's very loosely based on Pandora. And it's more, this is the world of our own world, basically. And we know of the myth of Pandora. And somehow, this has an effect on the story. That's it. So I wouldn't really call it a retelling, more loosely uses this myth. I really enjoyed this one. This takes place in the end of the 18th century. We also have a romance here, and the majority of it is actually not magic. It's our own world, it's more historical fiction, and then we have like some magic sprinkled through it in very small instances throughout the story. And actually, I didn't really like that. I would have liked it more if we didn't see that. There is like one conclusion of a small plot that gets resolved towards the end that is magic related, and that was like the big negative for me. Now, because it's such a small part of this story, I didn't mind that, and everything else I really liked. We have an animal companion here as well, which was very wholesome, and I thought that all of the secondary characters were very well executed. So all of it, including the story, I really enjoyed. I think that the writing style here is very reminiscent, for me at least, to Alex E. Harrow's writing style. So if you like The Ones in Future Riches, I didn't, but I did enjoy the writing style, then I think that this is one that you will enjoy as well. But don't go in expecting pure myth retelling, and don't go in expecting a lot of magic, because that's definitely not the case here. But all in all, still a new release that I would recommend. And then to end up the month, I actually read two grim dark novels. The first one was Priest of Bones by Peter McLean, the first book in the War for the Rose Throne series. Now, I am hosting a read-along for this series, one book per month. You can definitely still join, because this first book is only 330 pages. It has a very easygoing and fast writing style, so you can get through it very easily. And all in all, this was middle of the road for me. Now, I do have a spoiler-filled discussion already, which I will link in the description box down below. I read this one physically, and I don't really know, it's okay. I had fun while reading it, but it doesn't really have a long-lasting impression. This is Peaky Blinders, but make it fantasy, and I think that that's maybe my biggest issue the more I think about it. It is really just Peaky Blinders. I can recognize all of the characters in this book, and I can correlate them to the characters in the TV show. So if you recognize it that much, not a lot is added to it per se. Now, I think that this would have benefited from 100 pages more and adding some more meat to it. I do think that some seeds have been planted in this book, and if we see more of that in the next installment, then of course, this is the introduction to the world. It's more slow, you don't really see that much, but if then it pays off in the next installment, I'm fine with that. But at this point, I don't really know. I do really appreciate how this has a more unique setting. Most of the time, Grimdark has more setting in medieval England, while this is more 1920s England. So I can appreciate that. I think because they are so fast reads and because you can get through them very easily, these are perfect as palate cleansers to read in between other big series. But them being that, they will never be extremely outstanding or something that you will remember. You will remember the big series, not the palate cleansers, in my opinion. But like I said, I am quite curious to continue reading and see if some of the small hints that we see in this one, we will see more of in the second book. So quite curious to continue reading. And then the last book that I read in April, this one was a big success for me, and that is Red Country by Joe Abercrombie. This one I listened to an audiobook because the narrator for the First Law universe is absolutely amazing. I will always listen to the audiobooks for this world, and this is my favorite one of the standalones. So Red Country is the third standalone in the First Law universe. This is Joe Abercrombie's take on a Western, and he did this masterfully. I think that this is probably the standalone with the most self-contained plot. That is something that I can definitely appreciate when you advertise something as a standalone. The main characters here, Lamb and Shy, are absolutely amazing. I really liked their relationship. They have a father-daughter relationship, even though they are not biologically father and daughter, but I liked that relationship. I liked how complicated it was at times. I liked seeing both POVs and how they thought about that. I liked seeing the flashbacks to when they were younger. I absolutely adored it. Also, you have a very clear quest here. They are trying to find back missing children. And I like that. When you have a couple of people, they get together, they form a group because they have somehow a common goal. They are going to travel from point A to point B. I like that. That's why I liked the second book in the First Law trilogy so much, and that's why I liked this one so much. So definitely my favorite standalone of the bunch, probably pretty high up to my ranking of the entire First Law universe from what I have read up until this point. And after reading this one, I am again extremely excited to jump into the Age of Madness trilogy, which will probably happen in August. So if you want to read along with us, definitely keep your eyes open for that. So those were all of the books that I have read in April. Please let me know which books you have read in April, which ones were your favorites, and did you also have some disappointments maybe? Let me know in the comments down below. Now, I have talked about some of the books that I'm going to read in May already. If you want to know more, you can find my May TBR video right here. As always, I hope that you enjoyed the video and see you next time. Bye!